good? All right, great. Good morning, everyone. So nice to be together. And this is a really fun one with two great friends who I think are incredible experts in this space. We're going to start our morning talking not about all of the doom and gloom in the world, but thinking about solutions, right? We're going to have a conversation today about trust. You know, it's funny, I think we were just talking about the Davoses we've been to, and for too long it always feels like the conversation about social transformation, geopolitics, often a crisis frame, sits very far away from where the technology conversations do. And one might say we're getting better at it, that now AI is the buzzword that's in every single conversation, but that kind of facile top-level thing doesn't really do it for me. If you're really going to have a conversation about technology and society, then those two conversations that have to converge around, to me, shared principles, rights, norms, values, frameworks that are able to be translated across those two domains in ways that let us make decisions, not merely about the technical choices we make, but about the social choices behind them. If that's okay with both of you, that's what I'd love to spend our time on. And I think we are on the record, but at the same time, whatever. Everyone, I'm Vilas Dhar. I'm the president of the Patrick J. McGovern Foundation. We're a kind of relatively unique philanthropy. We're a multi-billion-dollar foundation that's aligned not around a particular topic, but around the idea that we're in a time of extreme transformation of the social, the political, the economic assumptions that drive our society. And if one of the causes of that transformation might be the technologies we create, then one of the levers by which we might exert some control over what kind of future we create might also to bring technology into the process of social change. We work with organizations around the world to do that and are so delighted to be here with Project Liberty, an organization that I admire and respect so deeply, to say how do we bring those conversations really into the public forum. Audrey, Jimmy, I'd love for you to introduce yourselves, to share a bit about your work, and then we'll get into the conversation. Audrey, maybe to you first.
Sure. Hi, I'm Audrey Tang. I served as Taiwan's digital minister for 7.5 years, and now am the Taiwan cyber ambassador. Before I became Taiwan's digital minister around 2014, the trust level in Taiwan was really low. We're very polarized, like 9% of trust. So we're 24 million of people. Anything the president says, 20 million people are against that. And using, it's not a very, very high amount of trust. And the idea that I learned from Tao Te Ching, from this Taoist scripture, is that to give no trust is to get no trust. So we worked on ways to maximally give trust to our citizens, to co-create our policy and so on, so that by 2020 our trust level is back at over 70%. So from 9% to 70%, there's a lot of ways to empower people to train AI models together and then use those AI models to do sense making, so that we can see the people who are usually divided. There's one or two uncommon grounds that people manage to agree on, whether it's Uber, Airbnb, counter-pandemic, mask, vaccine, whatever, that allowed us to rebuild the fabric of trust. And now I'm senior fellow at Project Liberty Institute to try to bring some of that bridge-making pro-social ideas to the social media scene. We call it pro-social media.
Great. Yeah, fantastic. So I'm Jimmy Wales, founder of Wikipedia. I'm just putting the finishing touches on a book about trust. So this is right up my alley and something I'm very interested in. Book comes out in October, and Audrey's in the book because we interviewed about all of your work. For me, this question of trust, I come at this and I look at it through the lens of Wikipedia. So Wikipedia, of course, is very, very trusting. We let anybody come, and you can just come to Wikipedia and start editing. And there's a little bit of behind the scenes checks and balances and things that go on, but it is a very, very trusting system. And what I like to draw it back to is everyday life, real life, day to day. And I have this analogy, the analogy to steak knives. So imagine you're asked to design a restaurant, and not just what color will the napkins be and things like that, but completely reimagine the idea of a restaurant. And you might think, well, in my restaurant I'm going to be serving steak, so people are going to need access to steak knives, and people with knives might stab each other, so we need to build a cage around every table, right? And we all chuckle because this is a ridiculous way of it helps us realize, like, actually in day-to-day life, sort of 990 people out of 1,000 are absolutely perfectly nice. There's maybe one who's actually malicious, and then there's those 9 who are just annoying, but they're not actually malicious. And we know this, and you'll sit next to to a complete stranger with a deadly weapon sort of sawing on some dead meat, right? That's a normal thing, and you don't think anything of it. Now, escape that mindset, which is like, most people are perfectly trustworthy and perfectly nice, and then switch to start thinking about Twitter, X, where you definitely get a vibe of people are crazy, they're horrible, they're mean, they're nasty, and so forth. And that is really about the social design, the design of the software that tends to reinforce and reward really bad behaviors and so forth. And if we make the mistake of thinking, well, I mean, no wonder you can't trust people. Look, they're crazy, right? That's a huge error. And in fact, what we need to think about is that real, one-to-one person, like, we do trust people. Most people are perfectly nice. And so we have to think about how do we rebuild that kind of a spirit and culture in social spaces. Pro-social media is a great term for this kind of thing.
I love it. I want to pick up this thread on rebuild, because I think that's a great starting point, right? And we have to take a step back and think about what we are rebuilding against. I spent a lot of my time in my scholarship thinking about the post-World War II era of institutions, right? There was a time when, globally, there was a very high level of implicit trust in the idea that the institutions we had built, that were supposed to protect a multilateral, rights-based order, would function, and would function really without a significant amount of public investigation or accountability, and certainly not these very broad-based attacks. And that changed in a really fundamental way. And unfortunately, outside the scope of today's conversation, to think about the why, but we see the how, right? And we see it quite explicitly. And then I want to bring it back to the two of you. Something changed even more, a material acceleration that happened because of technological intervention. You spoke to social media, but even if you go before social media, you see the early growth of the web. We saw the aggregation of power and control and the implicit political ideologies and transformations that came with it. Jimmy, you were there for all of this, right? What about that era do you look back on now and say, we could have predicted, we could have seen, we could have assessed, and take that to now and say, what are the kind of things that are happening in the same way?
I mean, it's a really good question because, it's sort of when we try to dial back and say we could have seen, well, maybe we couldn't have seen. Like, it seems easy in hindsight always. And in some of the elements of this, I definitely got wrong. I was convinced very early on that AOL Instant Messenger, was absolutely going to be a monopoly for all of the network effect reasons. There will be only one sort of messaging app because they become more valuable the more people are on it and more friends and so on. But basically, we now have a lot of competitors, right? On my phone, I have Signal, WhatsApp, Telegram, SMS, which people still use. It's amazing. And so that's an example where we didn't get a monopoly solution and we didn't get sort of concentration in the same way. So I do think these things are really very often path dependent and kind of hard to foresee. But certainly, the kinds of things that you could have foreseen. So if you go back to, and will show how old I really am, like Usenet groups. So Usenet was this massive sort of highly distributed message board system, sort of like Reddit, but distributed and not no centralized top-down anything. And it was hell on earth.
How many people in the room know what Usenet was? Okay.
Yeah.
Okay, and the second provocative question, Jimmy, will you disclose what your AIM screen name was?
I don't even remember my AIM screen name.
All right, that's fine.
It's probably Jimmy Wales.
Mine was Velociraptor, because mine was Velociraptor. But please, continue.
But Usenet was absolutely chock full of massive flame wars, trolling. In the early days, there wasn't that much spam, but spam started to be a problem. And so you could look at that and say, wow. And people did, sort of anonymous behind the keyboard causes people to act in bad ways. But it's no surprise then you fast forward and you say, oh, what if you had, short form little tweets, Is that going to be a really nice and friendly space? Well, you could foresee that it not automatically, that whole dynamic is predictable, that if we're not very careful about how we construct the norms, the rules embodied in the software and so on, then you can very easily end up with a very toxic space. And that is something that we did foresee, I think. I'm not sure we handled it all that well.
I'm going to come to you in a second, Audrey. But Jimmy, do you think people, this is a hard question, but do you think people act poorly because they have lost trust and faith in the system? or do you think they lose trust and faith in the system because people act poorly?
Chicken and egg. I'm not sure which comes first. I mean, I think it's there's elements of both. There's elements of both. But also, I do think it's very, very context dependent. So there will be people who are absolute trolls on Twitter because that's the social signals and what you sort of do there, who might be absolutely lovely in their Facebook group. Where there's somebody managing it who sort of says, no, we're going to be nice to each other and so on. And they probably are, sitting next to you having a steak, and they're not a horrible person. And so I think people, they do compartmentalize. And so it's not as easy as just say, well, they've lost trust in the system, so now they've become an online troll. It's more fluid than that, I guess.
Audrey, I'm curious, both on that topic, but also, I mean, by like 2016, 17, you had been active in open source, you'd been doing work with these communities, and then you're in a position where you look around and say, how do we set policy around this? What lessons did you take into that work?
Yeah, so in Taiwan, we see democracy itself as a kind of social technology that improves when people have a voice, a choice, and a stake. And I think a lot of trolling behavior online is really because people had a voice, but they had no real meaningful choice when it comes to technological choice, when it comes to the choice between one policy and the other, and there's no real stake. Like if they do contribute sincerely, most of the time, because the policymaker have no way to sense make all those input, so those input didn't go anywhere. And that led to a lot of very trollish voice because of frustration. And so I think in 2016, 17, when I first became digital minister, I became known for troll hugging. And troll hugging is like tree hugging, but hugging trolls. And very operationally means this. So like, for example, people would post like 300 words, 400 words online that names me in a very toxic way, stereotypes and things like that. And then I engage only with the 3 or 4 words within that can be construed as constructive. I use language processing because before joining the cabinet, I was working with the Siri team. So I'm actually quite okay with seeing all this as just corpus, training data. So I don't get upset by it. And so it shows everyone that was interacting with me that only the constructive parts count. And so the unconstructive or the catharsis doesn't count. And so I eventually train like language models like on my laptop that will help with the emotional labor that goes with it. And then people loved it. People loved being invited to discover the 1 or 2 sentences within their rant that can construct a petition, for example, that lets 5,000 people join in their cause and really change the policy for the better, whether it's banning plastic straws or whether it's about high schoolers going to school 1 hour later because they were complaining that lack of sleep makes their grades go bad. And all that actually resulted in meaningful policy change. So I think one of the key points here is that we need to have better sense-making technologies such that when people voice something in a very frustrated way, it actually gets translated to choice and stake.
I love this. First of all, troll hugging. What a beautiful concept. I know you've talked about it before, but I think it's wonderful. I really like this frame of a voice, a choice, and a stake. And I want to take that forward, one, because I'm still thinking about steak knives and terrified of my next dinner, but a voice, a choice, and a stake. If you think about the current, and I don't even want to paint with too broad of a brush. Let me not say the political climate. Let me say a few very vocal voices in the global political climate that have indexed very heavily to the idea of voice, right? The idea of expression as such a core value that it should lead to a total kind of step out of government, of any kind of policy making, like full expression all the time. Choice is a really interesting one, right? I don't know that we have created an environment of choice, but maybe the illusion of choice. And then stake, I think, is the most underexplored piece of this. And I'd love to spend a little bit of time talking about what that means. Like, what is, in your ideal case, not just the level of participation, but the transfer of value in a trust-based environment? Like, what's the implicit contract that allows that to work?
Yeah, I mean, I'll revert back to thinking about Wikipedia, where, people often start editing because they've seen a typo. They make a small edit, a small change, and then it sticks and they're happy, But also, if somebody makes a more substantive edit, and then they come back a few days later and somebody has engaged with that edit, and maybe improved it or maybe made it worse or whatever, that you build trust sort of one step at a time, incrementally like that, and it's and it's a little bit fragile, in those early steps, you're not sure. But then it can become really overwhelmingly positive experience for people because they say, oh, wow, look, I'm super interested in, I'll just pick a stereotype, trains, because there are people who are massively into trains and train spotting and all of this. And they find their tribe, they find their people, and they're like, oh, wow, like I can actually, in my real life, if I start talking about trains too much, people are like, okay, settle down, Jimmy. But these people don't, they don't, and like they're as interested as I am, and we can be passionate about it together, and we can really dig deep, and even in that you think, well, that's a pretty oh boy, there's controversies everywhere, but if they're civil and organized, then it's very positive. So
I want to ask you, in that example you described, there's a certain, well, I don't know. My contention would be there's a certain subset of people for whom there's value in that kind of interaction you just described, but not universal.
That's right.
Right?
I mean, it is a particular geeky hobby.
Sure.
It's not for everybody. And it's, I used to compare and contrast to bloggers, but of course blogging isn't as sort of big a thing as it, I think it probably is as big as ever. It's not top of mind. But now you think about social media influencers. So there are people, who edit Wikipedia, who are really active editors, who probably everyone in this room has read some of their writing, if they're editing on a really popular topic that, so they're massively influential in the world, but you have no idea who they are, and they don't care, right? They're not trying to become public influencers, whereas other people, bloggers in the old, but maybe people on Twitter or whatever, they actually do, like, they want, here's my view of the world, and I would like for people to read it and engage with it, and they're happy if they get a lot of followers and fame out of it. And those are just different. There's nothing inherently wrong. I might sound like I'm criticizing influencers. I'm not. It's just a different thing. It's like you might be Tom Friedman, who likes to have a huge audience, or you might be some obscure academic writing on the same topic, but the obscure academic cares more about what the other obscure academics are doing and thinking and engaging with, right? And grappling with ideas together. Whereas Tom Friedman's like, no, I really want a big audience in the world. I interviewed Tom Friedman for my book too, so yeah.
Remind us the title of the book.
The 7 Rules of Trust.
There you go.
So,
All right. Forthcoming
In October. But yeah,
so,
it's so I do think it and so for most people, how many people in this room have edited Wikipedia at some point? So pretty high, and this is a well-educated, active, tech-savvy audience who came to hear me on a panel. But most people, their interaction with Wikipedia is not about editing and contributing. They are consumers. They just go and they read, and that's also, a mode of interaction that's really important.
So this is really good. I want to come up and take this line, Audrey. So you talked about, I think you framed it as technology as a democratic process experience. Like, I love that. Sociotechnology. I'm not sure that the pockets of extreme technology development in the world would agree with that frame, right? And you hear it in the language, right? Like, this is about innovation. This is about, like, technologically driven progress. What you rarely hear is participatory mechanics or the idea of values-based framing of research and development, right? And I'm also struck, if you'll excuse me, with a pop culture reference. Like, what's that line from one of the Chris Nolan movies, like one of the Batman movies, like, some men just want to watch the world burn? Like, there is an element of this idea that even as we espouse these principles of what positive framing might look like, there are those actors who are not so interested. Sometimes state actors, sometimes individuals, sometimes collectives. When we come back to this idea of stake in a democratic experience, like, what did you do or what do you see as possible to get people to believe that they should advocate for, that they do deserve, that they need to exert their ownership of that future?
Yeah, first of all, I don't think there's anything inherently wrong with creative destruction as is. What we don't want to see is a place where the first creative destructor created a trap, a collective product trap, that for individuals is impossible to move out of that first imagination of whatever social mechanism they came up with. So in social media, of course, there's this very classic, well-known research by now that average undergrad in the US using TikTok will not move away from TikTok unless you pay them like $60 per month because they lose that much utility. However, if there's a magic button if you press and everybody they know, including themselves, move away from TikTok to something else, they're willing to pay you $30 per month. So that's a product trap. And so that is because it was designed from a product viewpoint, not a protocol viewpoint. A protocol viewpoint is like Wikipedia. I can set up my own Wikimedia instance, my own fork of Wikipedia, as long as I agree with the protocol that whatever I edit will be contributed back using Creative Commons share-alike license to the origin, right? So as long as I honor that social contract, I have a choice to present Wikipedia in whatever way I like. And Wikipedia benefit from that because many people improve Wikipedia experience, taking advantage of that more share-alike ethos. And so now we're both advising the Free Our Feeds, right? It's a public interest foundation that uses technologies underlying Blue Sky, but it's more than Blue Sky. It can work with Truth Social. It can work with TikTok. It can work with anything that supports this kind of relay so that people, even if they move away individually from, say, TikTok or Twitter or X.com, they don't lose their existing connections. They don't lose their existing content. And so only when a real choice is given can we really talk about fair stake, because otherwise the stake is temporary. It is conditional on this benevolent creative destructor, but if they become less benevolent, like next month, turns evil, there is nothing that puts them in check. Whereas a protocol level design that says, okay, anytime Jay Grabber of Blue Sky or her investors force her to turn evil, people would just individually switch to a better relay, and then there's no incentive for them to become evil.
Audrey, I appreciate that, but I want to come back to the question. I think you're talking about protocols as enablers of people to feel agency.
That's right.
Let me ask you, again, one of these hard questions. Do you feel like people, writ large, like very abstract, know, want, advocate for, recognize that these protocols can help them? Oh. And if not, what do we need to be doing to engage that, or bring maybe that conversation into the public discourse?
Oh, definitely. If they have first-hand experience, for sure. For example, in crowdsourcing the laws around the fraud advertisement on, say, Facebook, last March, we implemented a protocol. We call it Alignment Assembly. It's a citizen assembly to align AI, basically. And we sent 200,000 SMS to random numbers in Taiwan and asking people, how do you feel about those deepfakes online? And people gave us a lot of feelings. And then for people who have time, we say, okay, how about a long day of online deliberation? And 450 people, a microcosm of Taiwanese public, were selected through random sortation, stratified, random sampling, like a rigorous poll. And then 45 rooms of 10 people each had a facilitated conversation facilitated by the assistive AI. And so then each room come up with some fragment of good idea. For example, people say, oh, Facebook should require if Elon is an advertisement selling you crypto, then it needs to secure a digital signature from Elon to know that it's actually blessed. And if it's not, then somebody say we shouldn't fine them. We should actually make them pay. If somebody gets scammed for 1 million, then Facebook should be liable for that 1 million. And the other room says, oh, what if Facebook doesn't comply? Then we should slow down connection to their servers and finally stop resolving their domain. And another room says that it's not content moderation, right? This is actor level. It's KYC, essentially. So that crowdsourced the first anti-fraud law. That's in effect. So on Facebook or YouTube now in Taiwan, you don't see any of those celebrity deepfake ads anymore because we passed that law and they did comply. And so I think the key here is that when people are in this room of a conversation network with 9 other people having such AI-facilitated conversation, they feel the protocol. They feel the protocol of the pro-social behavior. Whereas if they are in this individual very angry rant mode, just facing a blank wall with a small screen, then they don't get into that. So the social protocol is equally important. I think conversation network has the potential of becoming a much better social protocol than those individual rants.
I'd like to give an example that's a non-tech example, that's a real-life example of how not to do this. So the street I used to live on in London is across the street from the primary school, and there was a lot of traffic on the street in the mornings, parents dropping off the kids, and they sent out a community consultation. They wanted to remove 2 of the parking bays and put in a little sort of bricked area for the kids to stand. community consultation. So they sent out this thing, and people could send back in their comments. People did, and then a few months later, we said, okay, we've got the results of the community consultation. 80% of the people on the street who responded were opposed, so we're going to build it anyway. And I was like, if you were just going to build it anyway, then why did you even bother asking us? So I felt like this was a process where ultimately I didn't feel like I didn't actually respond because I didn't really care one way or the other. And it turns out it was quite nice for the kids, but there's not much parking in the neighborhood. So, it was a tough call, and it absolutely makes sense to say, wow, rather than some traffic planner, all the way across town, it is a good, like, let's engage the very local community. What do you want here? But then if you just ignore them, it's really counterproductive. And, if they said, actually we surveyed everyone on the street and they were 80% opposed. We surveyed the parents of the kids in the school, and sort of 340 kids' parents said, yes, we want this, and 0 said no. So we're afraid that sort of overrules just because you live on the street. So, but they didn't say that. They just ignored it. So that's, when we're designing things like this, if Audrey says, we did this thing and we got this draft law that these groups of people had all put input to, and then we decided actually we'll just throw that out and we'll just do a different law, then you've actually actively undermined trust, because now you sort of fake engaged. So
there's something, we're going to come to questions we have many experts in the room. As I look around, I see so many familiar faces. But I want to ask you one more, maybe with short answers so we can get to questions. But Jimmy, your point is so provocative for me. My wife's a very prominent behavioral economist. Her name's Vilas Dhar. She's great. One of the things that she is really great at is just giving me the common sense answer to all of my big technology questions. One of the things she says is, look, for 2,000 plus years, we focused on democratic processes in various ways. And yet we still make the same mistakes today that we used to make in ancient Athens, right? This idea of polling without action attached to it, right? Like trust without accountability. So the short question I have for you is, what does technology empower us to do that the last 2,000 plus years of democracy didn't yet allow us to do? I've heard you already talk about participatory assemblies. I think that's amazing. Anything else that pops into mind as really interesting moments of hope?
Well, I mean, one that absolutely was not possible to do for technical reasons is have literally hundreds of thousands of people write an encyclopedia together. This idea that we can have an entry on Tim Berners-Lee, which I think if we went to look, has probably been edited by well over 100 people, I'm just guessing, where different people they read something, they added this, added that, they tweaked whatever. Like, that wasn't possible. Even 10 years before Wikipedia started, the best you could do is email around Word docs or something. It just wasn't work. But that technological shift meant there's a new way of collaborating. And I think there is still a huge amount of room for invention and innovation around social media to say, how can we build a healthier social? And I don't know the answers, right? But it's like a lot of what we're doing. Actually, one of the things that I worry about from a public policy perspective, there is largely when legislators think about regulating social media, the model they have in mind is the existing model, which I call the feudal model, which is all the users are serfs on the master's estate, and the moderators work for the company, and that it's very top down. And if you go in and you start to write regulations, assuming that's the only possible model, then you impose requirements on that moderation level, which, by the way, if you impose on Wikipedia, it causes a huge problem. If Wikipedia is required to do fact-checking, like the Wikimedia Foundation, wow, we don't do fact-checking. Our whole community is built around fact-checking, right? And so that's the kind of thing. And also then, that's just Wikipedia. We were about, don't damage Wikipedia by passing social media laws that accidentally hit us in a bad way. But also don't stop potential innovation of bottom-up community. So, we're advising about this sort of free your feeds. Blue Sky is a really interesting, potentially open protocol. And all these things are innovations that have some promise, but if we accidentally regulate too soon and regulate on the assumption that you must have this sort of feudal model, that's going to be a mistake.
Got it. Thank you. Audrey?
Yeah, so we talked about how Wikipedia is basically like not just community notes after the fact, but before the fact. Like as things develop, we have this community of sense makers. In policy-making realms, this kind of sense-making technology is now getting like really good with language models. Just on this laptop runs something that is on par with O1, so it's very good with reasoning and can actually do sense-making across languages, cultures, and things like that. I think the next frontier is not just ingesting the data and making sure we have a shared narrative, but then project that narrative back to the individual communities, the individual members, the individual rooms, so that they really feel that they're heard, and how exactly does this common sense making affect their lives in very specific ways that their original ideas can have a real connection. Previously, this is like local level, like really township district level counselors to do that job, but it's a not very scalable job. And now for example, for this year, I think have the Google Jigsaw sense-making tools in open source that for the first time provides, like in virtually no-cost way, in a model-agnostic way, for this kind of local coming back to connect, to close the loop, not just broad listening, not just broadcasting, but connecting the two.
And just,
Yeah.
you know, an example.
Go to questions.
Yeah, good question. But the UK government under Cameron, so a long time ago now, asked the public for suggestions, and they wanted people who worked in various government civil service suggestions on how to save money. They wanted to do cost cutting, and they got like 30,000 responses, and that was a huge problem because they have a big pile of 30,000 responses, all very thoughtful, kind citizens who try, and they just literally couldn't do anything with it. Now with large language model tools, to say somebody needs to read 30,000 comments and summarize some of the key points that are key themes. That's so easy now that you actually have technology that can help a well-meaning effort like that to actually practically say, oh, actually we have actually read the comments, or anyway, the robots did, and they gave us the summary. So, yeah.
We're going to take a few. I'd love to, usual invitations, please introduce yourself. I welcome statements, but let's keep them short. If there's a question, that's great. We'll take a couple and then come back to the panel.
Hi, I'm Luana Genot, also YGL.
Awesome.
So I'm from Brazil, from Rio de Janeiro. So kind of freezing here for me. And we launched last year Debbie, which is an AI that helps spreading racial and gender literacy and democratize this discussion about equality. So Audrey said that democracy is a social technology, right? Yeah. So I really like this statement. And there are a lot of people using actually the argument that we need to democratize social media. That's why we need to actually ban fact check. At least in Brazil, there is this huge discussion that fact check is against the freedom of speech on the internet. So I want to hear your thoughts on that. So what's the future of fact checking, and also the future of collaboration, especially with the countries from the global south? So if you guys can share some potential collaborations. Thank you.
Let's take one or two more, and then we'll do, yeah.
Thanks very much. Very stimulating panel. I'm Phil. I'm with LightRock. We're a late-stage impact investor. Impact investing, for those who don't know, means that you target both commercially competitive financial returns as well as positive social or environmental impact. And my question to the panel is, what sorts of business models do you think private capital like LightRock's can back to be part of the solution? And maybe beyond business models, governance models, overall setups, my worry is that the incentives for so many private businesses is extractive and to inflame rather than to create sort of healthy civic spaces. Thanks.
One more. So far, a global majority, private capital and participation.
Thank you. My name is Sandy from Australia. I serve on our Minister for Innovation and Digital Economy. This question is for Audrey. Audrey, I really appreciate the fact that you open your panel with Tao Te Ching, which is a Chinese and an ancient philosophy. I speak on this subject at the WTO last month, basically sharing with people what's the difference between East and West approach in terms of AI governance and also AI advancement. Given the fact that there's a very low trust in AI at the moment, particularly in the West compared to the East, how much of what you've done in Taiwanese government can be applied in a Western democracy in bridging bridges and building trust?
I love that. Good alignment in some of those questions. Do you want to start, Audrey?
Sure. So first, the fact-checking question. So in Taiwan, we have, since 2019, switched the school curriculum from what's used to be media literacy, which is about consuming, critical thinking, to media competence, which is about co-creation, fact-building together. And I think this really changes the dynamic that people have with the fact-checking thing. Because previously, it's like a few professional fact-checkers, journalists, institutions, and everybody else. But now there is a ladder of expertise so that the younger people actually can fact-check the 3 presidential candidates as they're having this conversation. They can measure air quality levels, water levels, water pollution levels, noise levels, and just fact-check our environment minister, and so on and so forth. And we found that what inoculates a young mind against polarization attacks is not the checked facts. That does nothing. It is the act of going through fact-checking. Like thinking like a journalist, checking the sources, rigor, and so on. Because if they learn grounding in their mind, they do not get pulled by outrage and so on. So this is why I think this level of like middle schoolers, 15 years old, is so important. And according to the International Civic and Citizenship Standard Study, the Taiwanese 15-year-olds are now top of the world in OECD equivalent countries when they feel like they're already a full citizen, like already 18 years old when it comes to the effect of making sure that there's social change. And I think that is generally applicable. I don't think there's a West versus East difference here. I think the idea of the young people's know-how actually steering the world into a more pro-social, a more pro-environment, pro-planet way, it is universally recognized. So the question now is really just that to which degree do we want to share agenda-setting power with them? And so we're now working with like state governments in the US and many other places around the world, especially around the social media terms of use, like whether young people should be able to use some social media only in grayscale, only in large tablets. How does that work? All right, so we should actually consult those young people and have them co-create the rules. So there will be an announcement in a couple of weeks on one of the US states about this going forward. And so, long story short, I think what we need to focus on is to ensure that there's nothing about them without them. And to have this kind of broad listening skills so that when a young person suddenly finds out, oh, there's a way to build a better social technology informed democracy, we can then amplify that to as many places as possible.
Yeah. Thank you.
Yeah, thinking of ancient wisdom sayings, what I'm hearing is, give a man a fish, you fed him for a day. Give a man a fact, he knows what's happening today. Teach them to fact check. Yeah. And you've given them knowledge for a lifetime. And I think that's really crucial. I mean, it's funny because the reaction to Facebook's doing some stuff, I mean, I haven't fully understood exactly what they're doing, but stopping some fact-checking was pretty, there was a lot of outrage and concern and upset. But for me, I'm like, well, they need to replace it with something positive. But that's the feudal model where we expect Facebook to somehow be the arbiter of truth, which, by the way, only gives one more step in a total lack of trust. Because, as you say, if you're not engaged in that, it's like, oh, well, here's yet another big authority telling me the sort of party line. I don't trust it. I think they're pressured by the government, or they're, the communists at Davos are forcing us to do this,
Not terms that have usually been put together. But
no, this is, go search for it on Twitter. The number of people who say that Davos is full of communists, I'm like, I've been there for a while. Most of those billionaires I've met don't seem to be communists.
You know what they say?
It's really stealth communism if it's communism.
If you can't figure out who it is, it might be you, Jimmy. We're coming to the end of our time here, but I want to respond to a few of these amazing comments. Oh, one more thing? Go ahead.
On the business model front, I'm very intrigued by capped returns models. What's happened with OpenAI is, unfortunately, I think, cast a bit of a shadow on that concept But I still think there's something very powerful in that investors can invest in something with a very nice potential return, which most of the time you're not going to get because it's investing, where then at the end of the day you end up in a sort of a Wikipedia nonprofit type of structure for certain types of things. I think it's super interesting, and it's one that I think we should see a lot more experimentation with. So that's all.
Love that. A few things. So on this fact-checking piece, which I love that you brought into the conversation, there's a conversation we had about fact-checking. There's a broader conversation that I think it shows the repudiation of that market-only model for where we invest research and development dollars. When the platforms were saying we will do a base level of fact-checking, we have a variety of nonprofits we work with that are working on AI-based fact-checking solutions that could not access the capital markets. Because people said to them, why do we need to fund you to do this? Aren't the big companies going to do it eventually? As it turned out, the big companies didn't do it eventually. And so it does give us a frame to say there is a need for a third corollary side approach that talks about the allocation of market capital to things that have public purpose with profitability attached to them that actually fill an entire gap in the innovation ecosystem. So we have now deployed live AI fact checkers that sit next to human fact checkers in real time on media, right? So you can go to a broadcast and get real-time information.
Yeah.
The second thing I want to say, and I'll close with this topic, right, is for the last year I've been engaged in this UN high-level advisory body on AI work. It's led to the Global Digital Compact and a number of new frames that are coming out. What's integral to it is the idea that if we want to think about global governance, if we want to think about global frames of trust, there is no mechanism by which a small set of tech companies define that for the rest of us and that we are happy about it. And really, if that's one of the takeaways that you take out of this room, I think what both of you have spoken to so eloquently, that trust is a shared process, that it does not happen because somebody creates it and tells us how to participate. It happens because we invest in defining the rules of the game. I want to thank you both so much for joining me. It's always good to be with friends, to Project Liberty for hosting us. There's another panel coming up in just a little bit, so have a coffee and come join us again. Nice to see you all.